entering the Squared Circle pit, we have the guitarist of Hammerfall. We have Oscar on the line. Oscar, thank you for taking some time to hang out and talk about pro wrestling.
Well, thanks for having me. It's not often that I get a chance to actually talk about wrestling, so I think I'm going to enjoy this.
That's why I started this podcast. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You're in Gothenburg, Sweden.
Yes, yes,
Now,
I am.
now I always love talking to and hearing about international pro wrestling fans because I'm curious. Like, how do you watch pro wrestling in Sweden?
Well, it's the network, the WWE network. That's
Ah,
basically what you have to watch. There is I don't know exactly when the last time it was on television in Sweden, but years and years and years ago. I think probably 90s, and that was WCW, by the way.
but before the WWE network, a few years ago, how would you watch wrestling? Just online?
Well, I to be honest, I have not watched it that much for a couple of years. Now I started watching again,
You
but
got back into it. I see.
yeah, I got back into it. But like around, it was the time of Eugene. Actually, that was one of the things that I didn't really like very much about what they
Hmm.
were doing. And that was not the only reason, of course, but there was many other stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
But that was,
that was
you
like
know,
when Triple H was the top guy and just beating everybody. That was definitely not a high period for wrestling. So a
yeah.
good time to check out for sure.
Yeah, that's I guess so. But what I wish is that I would have gotten back into it earlier. I wish I would have been there for the CM Punk eras, for example. That would have been fun as hell to watch.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was definitely. I agree. That was certainly a highlight. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get into pro wrestling? What was your first exposure to it?
this was, I think, 1991.
Hmm.
Well, obviously, my first exposure was in the 80s, where I didn't know anything about it, but I just I knew it existed. A friend of mine, or my brother, actually had an old NWA tape from '85 or whatever, but I didn't really know any. I mean, that's all I knew
Hmm.
that it was something, but I didn't follow it or anything.
I see.
But then in '91, I think it was Tuesday in Texas, so it would have been maybe November or whatever
Yeah,
at the
yeah. It
end of
was right after
91.
Survivor Series. Yep. It was.
Exactly. Uh,
Mhm.
so that it was on television at my then girlfriend's house. They had Sky Channel, the British TV channel. That's what it was on back then.
Mhm.
No Swedish channel. So only I just happened on it, and Undertaker was on. Of course, I was really interested and hooked right away. It took a couple of months. I started realizing this was like a weekly thing, and I didn't know anything about the schedule or the business or anything at all back then. So once I found out what this is something, they have these pay-per-views and the big shows and whatever, I started getting into it, and from that moment, basically, I was hooked. This was what I wanted to do. I think if somebody told me back then, during the middle of the '90s, late '90s. Do you have a job in wrestling? Not as a wrestler, obviously, because I could never do what they do. But just anything
To be
connected to wrestling.
involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have taken it like this, without out a second thought. This was my absolute passion. I had wrestling and metal were my two passions, and then metal became my job. But wrestling was my passion for many many years after that as well.
So
So yes.
which came first for you, wrestling or metal?
Oh, metal. I mean, I started listening to metal in the early '80s, so
Okay. So
that's
you were a serious metalhead by the time you saw the Undertaker, and then perhaps
yes,
because the Undertaker was so metal,
yeah.
it drew
I
you
think
into it.
I'm sure that's what it was. If I was let's see, 19 at that time, I was playing in a death metal band. That my whole world was very aggressive metal. That's
Hmm.
that's basically what I was playing. So he fit right in with that dead man gimmick thing.
Right.
I was instantly.
So you were saying you were watching it weekly. So it was on in the early '90s. It was on every week, and the pay-per-views were
Well,
accessible in Sweden.
yeah, I guess. I mean, the There was the only thing because Sky Channel, there's the satellite channels, they come and go, and back then it was not at all what it is right now. So I don't know if they had Sky Channel anymore, or for maybe a year or something.
Yeah,
But then
I believe they're still on Sky. I believe
oh, they still are. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
the weekly shows are on Sky, on like
Okay.
Sky
So
Sports 5.
maybe what it was that we didn't get that channel anymore. I think that's what it was. So I have found because there was on German channels back then as well. So that's where I started watching it, and it was basically just Superstars. It was the show Superstars.
Right.
That's basically what we have. But I recorded that show every week for I think 3 years or something like that on a VHS tape. So every month I had one new VHS tape, basically.
Oh, I see. Do you still have those tapes?
Of course I do.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool.
But it's all in German, so it doesn't it doesn't give you the same. Of course, it's for a trip down memory lane. It's fun because that's how I watched it back then. But
right.
But it's you want to have the real commentators and stuff. That's the best. And actually, WWF was on Swedish television for a really short period of time, maybe, no, I don't think even a year. They had because I know they were at SummerSlam in '92 in London. They went there, those two commentators, and so it was on one of those. It was on a pay channel for movies back then. Called TV 1000. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But anyway, and they were on for a little while. They stopped, and then they were on. They moved actually in the same under the same umbrella, but a different channel. And they started airing WCW instead because you had. Do you remember Frank Anderson, the Swedish amateur wrestler?
No, I don't actually. This is a WCW wrestler.
Yeah, he was. In the late 70s, he was one of the best in the entire world. So he's really famous in Sweden, just for as a sportsman.
I see.
And then in the early 90s, he wanted to try wrestling, professional wrestling. So he signed with WCW, and I suspect that the matches and the programs and the stuff that they got on this channel here in Sweden was set up so that he would be. He was the focal point, so we didn't really get to see any of the big stuff. Sometimes like Clash of the Champions and stuff like that, they aired stuff, but there wasn't much more than that.
That's
actually.
So funny that you say that. Like I just looked up a photo of him. I have no recollection of Frank Anderson, and I watched WCW all throughout the '90s. So that's so funny how they edited a different version for Europe. So would you say
he was never in any matches at all? I mean, I don't think he faced any top opponents at all, basically.
So would you say it was always a bit of a challenge to kind of find wrestling? Like now, obviously with the network, it's not as much, but before it was like, you take what you can get in Europe.
A bit of a challenge is actually an understatement. It was hard as hell to find stuff to watch. So basically, what I did was read a lot. I mean, this was also before internet, so. I used to buy the WWF magazine. I still have those as well for like 4 or 5 years maybe. That was my and also Inside Wrestling. Those
the after mags.
Exactly. At that point, I mean, I wasn't 100% sure because it was so early for me. I mean, you guys grew up with this stuff. For me, it was just something I discovered when I was almost 20 years old. So I wanted so bad to believe it was real. So a part of me thought, okay, I know this doesn't really happen, but this phrase "suspend your disbelief" fits so well for me. It was so easy to do it because that made wrestling so much more fun. If some small part of me thought it might be real, even if I knew. But then I started to get into these. The British magazine called Power Slam. I guess this would have been
late
mid 90s.
Right? Oh, mid 90s. Yeah. I've heard of Power Slam. A lot of British wrestling fans always talk about it.
Yeah, this was fantastic. They opened up a lot of eyes. I mean, they opened up my eyes a lot to what was behind the
right. They talked about the inside stuff, like what was happening, like why this person won, why this person left for another company. And that's
the stuff that you never.
Right.
Sorry? Yeah,
Well, what I
the
was
stuff
saying,
that you never found out,
yeah.
like he was fired and they never talk about him again. But then reading but these magazines, you understood what happened really. So
It's
that
funny.
was really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny you say that. Like, I was just talking to somebody at a party who did the whole like, oh, well, don't you know it's fake? That whole stupid thing. Like
Yeah,
movies aren't fake. Like a
yeah,
superhero movie
yeah.
is supposed to be real. Uh, but it's funny that they say that because I'm always like, yeah, I know because it's predetermined, because it's choreographed. That's what makes it good. That's what makes it exciting because half the fun for a wrestling fan, I feel, is the behind the scenes politics of why this
Mhm.
person won. Like, oh, this ending doesn't make sense. Like why did the show end this way? And then you find out the real reason, and so it's
Yeah.
almost as if the behind the scenes is kind of what makes the stuff watchable.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Actually, I agree to a certain extent. It's definitely much more fun to watch the things if you know the backstory
Right.
as well, and not just what they the on-screen story. I mean,
Hmm.
and that's, to be honest, sometimes it is hard to get into the on-screen stories now. I don't know if obviously I changed. I mean, I'm 20 years older now,
Hmm.
so obviously my perception of things and the way I react to things is different now than it was 20 years ago. But it still feels like it's a little bit bland, and I guess it's this PG thing. It's supposed to be a violent sport, but only violent up to a certain point, and then it can't be more violent than you can't hit each other in the head with the chair shots, and you can't show blood and all that stuff.
Well,
And
but the reason you can't hit each other with the chair though is
yeah,
because it's
yeah,
been
yeah,
found
I
to
know.
give permanent brain damage. So it's
Right,
probably,
right.
and I don't the blood I could see. Like I get what you're saying, but the chair shot, I think it's
Right.
honestly uncomfortable for me to watch old footage where people get hit in the head with a
Yeah.
chair.
Okay, it was not the best example, but
But I
that
get what
that
you're saying.
you know, yes. So what I meant is I got into that whole ECW era thing
Hmm.
and the attitude. I mean, the pre-attitude, the era before attitude that led to the
Right,
WWF
right.
attitude thing. I was very into that as well, and that was through tape trading.
Okay,
With
that's great. Yeah, so
British
I
people.
wanted to
Yeah.
talk about it. So it's funny that you have this experience, I'm assuming, with tape trading from the '80s, right? With
Hmm.
metal, and
Oh
then
yeah,
now it becomes tape trading with
yeah.
ECW tapes, and that's so funny that you say that because I also tape traded in the mid and early '90s when I was getting into ECW because I got into it and nobody in my area knew what it was because it was only on at 3 in the morning. So you really have to either stay up or
Yeah.
set your VCR. And it was the best wrestling at the
Yeah.
time. It was so much better than WWF and WCW. And I don't know
What
if
era? What area was this? You said
oh I lived in
where was this?
I live in New York. Uh,
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, pretty big market, but like ECW didn't really do any marketing. It was very word of mouth, and this was
Mhm.
like slightly before. Like the internet was around, but it wasn't as that big. So the way I found it, I was just channel flipping one day,
Right.
and I saw Raven. And Raven used to be Johnny Polo in WWE. I'm like, well, that's Johnny Polo, but he
Yeah.
looks much cooler
Exactly.
now.
Yeah. Exactly. He looked really, really uncool in WWF.
Yeah, and
That's
then he
probably.
looks like this kind of like grunge metalhead.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And then I saw Sabu and I was hooked. And after
Yeah.
Sabu, I was like, well,
Yes.
that's it. I have to watch this every week.
Yeah. It's Sabu was a really good at getting people because he was like once you watched him once, he was doing things that nobody else was doing at that time in at least in the U.S. So
Yeah.
he just it was unbelievable.
He could do
And
anything. He could do the violent stuff, the hardcore
yeah,
stuff. He could do,
yeah.
cruiserweight stuff, like high flying. Nobody was doing triple jump moonsaults before.
No, that's true. But he was. I was just thinking about that because with the network is so cool. You can go back and watch different stuff,
Yeah.
and I mean they don't have the early ECW.
They
Just those
actually,
sort of the.
no, they have every episode now of the show.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, like this year, like they just
Oh
added.
well.
So you can go watch week to week.
Wow, that's cool. I didn't know that actually, because I thought the early ECW was the property of what's it, RF Video, and that's I
No, no,
thought
no,
he
no,
did.
no, no. They bought the entire library. RF Video have
Oh,
their
wow.
own. RF Video tape their own tapes when they were there, but ECW has their footage and our video has their footage. But
I see. So
every episode is on there, and I've kind of, what I've been doing is like when I have nothing to watch, I started in 1995 and just going week to week watching the show, and it's such a trip. It's some of it is still like a lot of it I feel holds up because it's so good, it's so entertaining and exciting.
Yeah. That's what I liked about that time. I mean, that era, and to get back to what we were talking about before. Sure. Because I liked the believability of everything. Forget the chair shots to the head, but everything was more stiff then, and I guess that's difficult on the bodies for the wrestlers and everything. But just as a spectator, it's easier to get into this when you have MMA, that you know what a submission hold looks like. You know what happens if you get one clean shot on the jaw or behind the ear or whatever.
Right.
Then people go down, and then that's what I was getting at with
the
today's.
Yeah, no, I totally. So what you're saying is you don't like the more cartoonish aspects of things, which is kind of going back to what you're saying with why you checked out when Eugene was a wrestler. Yeah. It was so silly, and it wasn't about like the wrestling that you enjoy is wrestling that simulates an actual fight. Is what you're trying to say?
Not necessarily. I mean, yes, that is what I'm trying to say, but it's not as cut and dry as that either.
Right.
I mean, I can definitely enjoy a fun match or a fun angle or whatever, and it doesn't have to be believable all the time. It's just overall sometimes it gets to, well, actually, I don't know if it's the believability. It's the everybody's so streamlined nowadays, and that's hard. There's nobody that really stands out. When I tried to get back into wrestling again, and this was maybe, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, maybe. I don't know exactly when it was, but
do you remember what was happening? Like, what were the first?
No, not really. I just remember I saw a list of the names because I always watched the Royal Rumble every year, even if I didn't follow wrestling. And then there was these lists of names, and I've never heard of them before, and they were almost the same. I mean, they didn't sound the same, but it was like, you had Heath Slater and Dolph Ziggler, and it was just a list of names that, for me, just blended together. I know their personalities are different, but that was one of the difficult parts for me to get into everything, because it was so, nobody really stood out, or very few people stood out in the way that they used to do. So that, I guess, is the cartoon aspect is a good thing. That everybody has a proper gimmick, even though they were garbage men and clowns and stuff.
Well, we could do without Duke the Dumpster Josie for sure.
Yeah, I guess we could.
But so what I'm curious then is, have you watched any wrestling from Japan? Because that is very, very stiff, very snug. They're like really hitting each other.
Yeah, I actually have a little bit. Not so much now, but I used to watch. That was basically for the Wow Factor, I guess. The old FMW tapes.
So the more ultra-violent stuff.
Yeah. Well, actually, that was one of the things I remember. Atsushi Onita.
Onita, of course, the legendary Onita.
Yeah, he had some sort of scythe or something, some shit like that he was using on people, and I knew it was back then. By that time, I was sure. I knew that it was not for real. I knew that they weren't trying to actually hurt each other, but.
Onita was.
He fooled me, I could say.
I think it was really. Onita was crazy.
I fell for it.
I mean, Onita. I remember a friend of mine brought a tape over that he got from Japan on eBay about like the craziest matches. The craziest matches ever, and most of them were with Onita, and they were like exploding cage matches. Which, for those of you who've never seen it, basically it's a 15-minute match. And at the end of the match, it doesn't matter if the match is over or not. The entire ring explodes. Yeah, you have to get the hell out of the ring. Like that's
so crazy.
Then
they had one exploding swimming pool match once.
Yeah, with piranhas, right? Like there was a tank with piranhas that you were throwing people. It was just.
It's insane. It's just crazy stuff. I mean, and I didn't watch a lot of that either. I read.
You can only take so much.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that was one of the reasons I stopped watching wrestling. Not just because I didn't care for the product. It was not like I thought they sucked, but things in my life it demanded too much of my time, basically. And I had been following MMA as well, parallel to that. for since the mid-90s as well, actually, since '96, I think. And once, I guess this was around 2007 or 8. Yeah, it would fit because 2007 was the first time that the UFC came to Europe again. For they have been gone for many years, and I went to that show, and from that point on, I was much more an MMA fan than a wrestling fan, and that's why I basically, there was only so much hours a week that I can devote to anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's what it was for me. And it's like I had to watch 6 hours every week plus pay-per-views and stuff. And if you sat there and felt, I don't know if I can do something better right now, and that's why I fell out of love with it a little bit. But the funny thing is, all those years, I still watch the Royal Rumble, and I still watch most WrestleManias because it was just, it's in my blood. Yeah, no, it's in my blood. Even if I've never been in the ring, I still am passionate about it. So
are you watching now? Are you trying to follow it a little
yeah.
bit?
Yeah, now I'm watching. I'm watching the big shows because you can't watch the Raw and SmackDown on TV here because it's not available. And I've gotten so used to over the years just reading about Raw and SmackDown. That's all I've ever done basically, except when we.
So do you read and then if there's something cool, you'll look up a video of it or?
Yeah, that happens. Yes, but
Yeah.
mostly just read about it.
So
I was a subscriber to the Pro Wrestling Torch for several years,
mm-hmm.
for a while, quite, and that was a great source because then even if it took a week for me to get the actual newsletter, I still got all the results and everything from there, so I could keep up what was going on.
Yeah, I subscribed to the Pro Wrestling Torch in the 2000s, and now I subscribe to the Wrestling Observer.
Yeah. I just did as well now for the first time through the Observer. I just tried it because they had this Black Friday deal,
mm-hmm.
and I figured, okay, why not? I mean, I follow Meltzer on Twitter, and he's always talking about stuff, and I felt like, okay, I'll give it a shot. I want to get more into it, a little bit deep.
I like it a lot more than the Torch. It's much more in depth with the news, and his reviews are interesting.
Yeah,
and they have really good podcasts every week, so it's definitely cool.
So yeah. I haven't tried those yet. Actually, it's been because I listened to that other podcast with Lance Storm and Cyrus, and I think this is so entertaining.
Oh yeah, they just started that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Every time I get a free time or in my car or driving or whatever, I always listen to those podcasts because they're so fun to this banter that they have. They don't banter with each other actually so much, but it's just. I just found that very entertaining, and they talk about an era where I was actually a big fan of wrestling as well. So what they're talking about, I know what they're talking about,
So I'm guessing you mean the Attitude Era was your favorite. What was
yes.
your favorite era?
Yeah, Attitude. It has to
and
be.
Who were your guys? Who were your guys? Who were you rooting for?
I generally The Rock, of course. He was my favorite above all. The Rock and the Undertaker. But generally, I just like to watch the entertaining, the good matches and the entertaining angles. It didn't really matter back then. Everybody was so over anyway. It didn't
mm-hmm.
really matter. Didn't really matter who was in the angle, or of course it did in the end. But I appreciated
everything, yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
So
exactly.
what angles stand out for you as great memories of being so entertained or shocked?
Well, I like the when Undertaker crucified somebody. I don't know, was it Stone Cold or something? It's Stephanie. Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That whole angle was, in the retrospect, was really well done. I thought.
Ministry of Darkness.
Yeah.
And then Vince McMahon was revealed to be the higher power. How did you feel about that when he was like, "It was me, Austin"?
Yeah, that was maybe a little bit too much. I thought that was.
That's when I jumped the shark. I agree.
Yeah,
it didn't make sense.
No, it didn't really. Not with everything that's been going on before that. But I went to my first wrestling show ever was in 1998. I went to a Nitro in Orlando, I think it was, or something, or Florida anyway.
Oh,
we were
awesome.
we just finished a tour with the band Death, and we had a couple of days before the flight was home for some reason. So we went to a Nitro taping, and it was just unbelievable fun.
Do you remember what happened at the show? Like which show?
I rewatched it on the network just maybe 6 months ago or something, and I think it was that show when Ric Flair had a heart attack in the ring.
Oh wow! Okay.
That but I was not so much into WCW. It was basically in Sweden there was never a competition because you couldn't see any of them on television anyway. But I still always, I mean, I got into it with WWF, so that was where my
loyalty,
my interest and my loyalty lies. So it was a bit of I mean, I read about it, but I always rooted for WWF, if you know what I mean.
Same here. I agree. But like looking back now, I do miss WCW a lot because there was a lot of stuff that they did that WWF didn't really do, and it was cool to watch at the time, and there were a bunch of cool wrestlers. And I definitely recommend going back and watching old WCW from like 91 to 93 because it was some of the best wrestling around. Still holds up. Like,
oh yeah, with when Vader was on top.
With Vader, the Steiner brothers when they were in their peak. Like there was one event, I think it was a Great American Bash where it was the Steiner brothers versus Lex Luger and Sting, and it was one of the coolest It was such a hard hitting, stiff, athletic match. And it was, I just like that WCW always treated, at least before NWO, they treated wrestling as more of a sport than entertainment, whereas WWE is more entertainment than sport.
Yeah, that was the distinction back then, I guess. Maybe unofficial, but still, yeah. But they also had some not so. I don't know. This was not during the NWO era, I think. But this. Do you remember that the electric chair match?
Oh, of course, yes, that was terrible, but.
It was on every level. And do you remember when that was the worst? I mean, okay, you have an electric chair match and somebody's going to get electrocuted and blah, all that stuff. But then you can't even make like one of the switches when you actually turn on the chair.
The production fucked up.
Yeah, you can't even make a switch that stays up in the on position. I was just, it's laughable now. And this one I looked up and watched just because, you know, to get a laugh out of it because it's so ridiculous. And then when they actually, said Abdullah the Butcher ends up in the chair, I think, when they actually get him in the chair finally at the end, it's just, you don't really believe that he's getting electrocuted. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It was one of the low points, but like you said, there were a lot of great wrestling matches back then as well. But when I saw the WWF for the first time, that was one of the greatest things. We went to we were actually recording in Nashville for a couple of about 8 weeks, I think, or something. And at the end of this, I was so lucky that WWF came to Nashville Coliseum or whatever the hell they call the arena, and nobody liked wrestling, but I got Joachim the singer to go with me. I actually paid for his ticket just to have some company, but he had a good time, and that was also a show with The Rock, obviously, so I got to see him do his thing, and I was just blown away by everything that night. That was one of the highlights until I was actually backstage at WrestleMania 21 in Hollywood.
Oh, wow. How did that happen?
Because I know Mikkey Dee, you know, the drummer from
Motorhead.
But and he knew. I don't think he knew anybody that was a wrestling fan in Sweden except for me. So when they were going to play this the Triple H song, his intro song live at the WrestleMania thing, he called me and said, "Oh, you should come over." And at first I was like, yeah, there's nothing I'd rather do. I mean, I would give my left arm for this, you know, but I can't just go to LA for 3 days. It's impossible. And then he just said, typical Mickey, like, why not? I had no good answer. So I said, okay, I'm going to ask my friend if he wants to come as well, because I don't want to do all this by myself. I'll call you back in a little while. And my friend was almost as big of a wrestling fan as me. It was just throughout the whole 90s and 2000, it was just him and me. I didn't know anybody else that liked wrestling, and we watched every pay-per-view together almost every pay-per-view together. He came over to my house, whenever I got it from tape trading or from one of the guys at the German record label that we had used to send me stuff because he had a setup at home, a satellite thing, so he could record the pay-per-views with the actual commentary, like the you know, JR and Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
So we used to watch those two together, and he was ecstatic. So we flew over and did this whole thing where we were treated as members of the band entourage, whatever. So we got this dressing room where they were. We got to hang out, and this was a dressing room close to the other dressing rooms. Basically, like, you know how it is in those stadium things, just a long line of things. And it was so surreal for me, being such a big fan for 15 years almost, and seeing all these people that the first person that we saw, and not even that, we got to drive with Motorhead in their limousine to get drive into the arena underneath in the parking garage underneath and whatever.
Right.
And that was cool in itself, just unbelievable.
That's crazy.
And then the first person we actually see coming out of the limo is Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I thought, okay, shoot me now. It can't get any better than this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But it did. It did get better. We spent a whole day around there, watched the matches on the backstage monitors together with Stone Cold. By the way, one of the matches. I didn't talk.
So you got there early. Did you see like any rehearsals or any pre-show preparations?
I think there was some, and we went out to watch I think people were in the ring, just talking through some matches, but I was too buzzed, by energy to understand anything what was going on, and it was just so many impressions in one day, and this whole event, I thought, like I said, I didn't think it could get any better than this, and we're not allowed to go to the after party because that was only for the wrestlers and the band and stuff. And so okay, fine, it's fine. I understand this. So we went home to our hotel and we were, like I said, we were walking on clouds. This was the best day, the best weekend that we ever had in our whole lives. And then Mickey called me and said, "They changed their minds. You're allowed to come if you want." And now this is the part where. This was for me at that point in time. This was like the teenage Oscar getting to go backstage at a festival with Judas Priest and Accept and Iron Maiden and Wasp, but every Twisted Sister, all my favorite bands were there. That was exactly what this was, because it was in Hollywood, in Los Angeles. There was a lot of people who weren't actually on the show were there, and of course. We got to take pictures with all of them, even the Undertaker at the end. I pestered him all night, and he always said, and had an excuse that, I have to go talk to my wife or whatever. He didn't want to do it, of course. But since I, like I told you, he was like the reason I got into it, and he was my favorite for so many years. And luckily we ended up at the when you get to Coast at the end of the night, because we didn't leave until they closed the place. And it was the same with him and a few others. So then a last chance. Okay, I just want to say I'm sorry to bother you again, because he probably recognized me. I'm such a big fan. That whole thing, and you were the reason I got into. And then he was in a better mood, so I got to take my picture with the Undertaker. And I got to say, I've never felt smaller in my whole life than I did at that moment. He's such a big man. I'm pretty tall. I was taller than most of the other guys, the wrestlers there.
How tall are you?
6'3" or 6'3" point something.
Yeah, pretty tall. Yeah.
So yeah, and I know from the pictures like Edge and Randy Orton and those, they all look really tall on television. Yeah. But they're not as tall in real life.
I had that same experience too. I'm 6'5".
Really?
I'm a really tall guy, and I always assumed that I would just be like an average guy in wrestling. Like I wouldn't be like one of the I wouldn't look like a giant or whatever. But no. I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to interview some wrestlers at press events, and I'm always taller than them. Like for example, The Miz or even Brock Lesnar, who is one of the most intimidating people. Like I'm taller than him, and it was so wild to me. Like Granted, though, he is much wider than me and much scarier. So I'm not trying to say anything at all about that, but it was certainly a surprise. So at this party, who else was partying until the very end? What other wrestlers did you recognize?
Back then I was really drunk because I was drunk on happiness and on Bud Lights, but it was just. I don't really remember who was there. I think was his name Orlando
Bloom.
Jordan.
Orlando Jordan. Orlando Bloom is an actor.
He was there. He I didn't know this, but apparently he was gay. And
I believe he's bisexual. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So and I think he tried to pick up my friend actually.
Oh.
It was really funny. My friend is a lot shorter. He's kind of small actually to be for like he's I don't know, maybe 5'8" or something. He's really short. And so we were just walking outside, waiting for a cab. I think we were, and I think what happened was, and I was just drunk. So Orlando just asked, "What's happening? Were you guys going somewhere?" So I don't know. I'm just probably going back to the hotel. And we got the feeling that he wanted to come, and it's like, yeah, let's have a party. And I said, because I was oblivious to what was going on, and my friend obviously he's not bisexual or gay, he's got a wife and stuff. He was like a bit uncomfortable with this whole thing, so he told me in Swedish like, "Shut the fuck up now, we're leaving," So that didn't happen for Orlando. I mean, he was really nice, but that was, if you're not gay, you're not gay. I guess that's what it is.
Right, of course. Did you spot Vince McMahon at all?
No, I didn't. But I did say, I mean, we were in Motorhead's dressing room in the afternoon, and that was Triple H came in after all bloody and with the belt, or maybe he lost the belt. Yeah, he lost to Batista, but he came in afterwards with blood on his face and just I shook his hand and stuff, and that was really cool. I mean, we talked about him being on top and all that stuff, but I think he got a lot of negativity from people that were like us maybe or like me that didn't understand better back then, but because what he's done, I think he without him Vince McMahon would have been in a much worse position than he is today, I think.
Yeah,
anyway.
Sure.
But it was, so yeah, I just got lost. But Vince was never there, but I got to meet Ric Flair and Chris Jericho, of course.
Wow, what was it like to meet Ric Flair?
For that. I just said hi and took a picture. That's basically what it was. But but I have a picture with myself, Steve Austin, and Ric Flair in it. No, sorry. Yes. Well, I can't remember now. But I don't. I took so many pictures that day. But I think it was with. No, sorry. A picture with Ric Flair and a picture with Stone Cold and Chris Jericho. That's what it was.
I see.
And The Rock, of course. That was great because I really wanted to get a picture with him, and he was busy as always. He was also just there visiting because he had left for Hollywood back then. So I think because he was in LA, that's why he was there, I think, at the after party. And because I'd met Chris a couple of nights before at the Motorhead show that they did where Fozzy opened up. So we were talking when The Rock came over, and he basically, The Rock said, "Okay, I got to go, guys, blah, blah, blah." And then Chris went over to him and said, "Okay, this is my friend Oscar. He really would like a picture with you." So he just did one quick one with me, and then he took off. And that was so nice of Chris to do that. I will never forget that. Because nice. The Rock, he was such an entertaining character, and then one of my favorites, like I said. So I really enjoyed that.
Have you run into Chris at all with his band Fozzy while touring or at any festivals?
Not on festivals or touring, but we went to NAMM, the music fair in.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, I met him and Rich there once or twice. I can't remember. And that was when he was singing on stage with Stryper the same evening, I think, or the next evening, whatever. So, but yeah, sorry.
So just to wrap things up a little bit, you said you watched the big shows. Did you happen to see Survivor Series?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar?
Very surprising. I had for once managed to stay out of the predictions and all that stuff, and also the spoilers because I watched it the next day. And I was blown away. But I had read about how over Goldberg was at that time, and I watched all his interviews and stuff, and the interaction that they had on Raw before. This is electrifying. This is really, really good. So when I didn't understand how they would do this, but I also realized if they do this, this is not going to be the end. Of course, there's going to be something more. So after when I got time to digest it, and I read afterwards online a little bit why they did it, and then I totally understand why. And it was a really good angle now that they have going. And Royal Rumble has never looked more interesting than it already does, and it's only 2 participants, and as far as I know, 2 participants that are announced for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be a very fun show, and I'm curious to see where they go with it. And I was very shocked at the time.
yeah, shocking was a great word for it, because it was so unexpected. Right, this what happened. Just last thing for me, or not last thing, but I want a little fun fact. I used to have a wrestling fanzine when I was younger in
really?
Swedish. I did. Like I told you before, it was not at all available, or wrestling has been very well, I wouldn't say it's non-existent virtually in Sweden. It has been for many years, especially in the early 90s. When they had it on television, it was just for kids, and no sane grown-up, paid any attention to this. That's basically the attitude among everybody else, except for those few who liked it. But I started a wrestling magazine in Swedish, and I wrote about, my angles, my take on everything, and the news. I got some news for Power Slam and from the Torch or whatever, it's stuff like that. So it came out, 3 times, 4 times a year. I don't remember. But I did have subscribers after a while, which was interesting, and they
great.
talked about the magazine, the fanzine on television. That was kind of cool, because they were moving to a different time slot. So he said, if you want, I can show your magazine and show your address on the screen and everything. So he did, and that was really cool. So that helped a lot. I mean, I never made any money off of it, of course, but it was fun to have. I think at one point I had maybe 200 copies sold, or 150, 200, something like that. I had over 100 subscribers anyway, which was big for 100 people in Sweden that liked wrestling. I didn't know there was 100 people that liked wrestling in Sweden. So it was very unusual.
That's very cool. Yeah, I also had a wrestling, before I started a metal site. I had a wrestling site as well, and that's kind of, wrestling is what got me into metal. I've said I'm a little younger, and what really got me into it was a few things, but mostly, what got me into rock was hearing Diamond Dallas Page's theme song. I don't know if you remember, but he came out to like a fake version of Nirvana's "Smells Like Teen Spirit."
Oh, okay, I don't remember this.
And so then I was like, I should check out Nirvana. And then around the same time, Sting started coming out to Metallica's "Seek and Destroy." And then I was like, I should really get into Metallica. And so that's kind of how it happened for me.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's probably kind of unusual, though, to go that way, don't you think? To like get into rock music through the wrestlers' entrances.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be. I don't. Yeah, but it's
it's cool.
How it happened.
Yeah, it's great.
Cool, man. Well, Oscar, thank you so much for taking some time to hang out with me here on the
No problem at all. It was my pleasure.